Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour to be a part of the program. It is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. It's just one of those days where you just look at the mountain of projects you have and think, I've got room for one more. Why not?
Winter is coming, Jon Snow.
Yeah. Well, in this case, winter is probably better for me because all the outside projects have to stop.
Yeah, they'll cut down. But let me ask you something. Will you get to a point where you'll look out your back door and go, well, there's nothing you can do, Steve, so just back off and work on something indoors? Or will you look back and be like, spring can't get here soon enough, man? Like, seriously, I'm just,
Hard to say. The part of the backyard that I'm working on right now is halfway down the ravine, and so I can't see it from my window. So I can't see any of the progress or any of the non-progress that I'm making from inside the house.
You just have to pretend to yourself that you've gotten rid of all of the potential problems.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's take a call. 855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email live@asknoahshow.com. But your calls go to the front of the line. Good evening. You are on Ask Noah.
Good evening, Noah and Steve. My name is Jeff from Cincinnati.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey. So I am a little stumped, and I'm kind of hoping you guys can maybe steer me in the right direction. I have a Linksys AC 1900 wireless router that I use for the home network. And we got it from Best Buy. And right after I installed it, it was working great. No issues. And then all of a sudden, I started to notice my Raspberry Pi Zeros and some of even the hardwired Raspberry Pis just start dropping off the network. I run Uptime Kuma, which is an open source version of Uptime Robot, to kind of ping the IP addresses to let me know if they're there or not. And I started noticing them just dropping off. I didn't think anything of it. I thought, okay, maybe it's power supplies or something with the Pis. Played around with that. Just kind of let it go. Well, a couple of months later, my wife said, hey, my iPad is dropping off, and I'm starting to have issues occasionally with my laptop dropping off, and she has a MacBook Air, as well as I do, in addition to a bunch of other computers. I thought, okay. So I tried fiddling with the router a little bit, couldn't find any specific issues, and then finally just did a complete factory reset of the router, reconfigured it for our network. Everything pops back on, worked great for about a week, and then the same things started happening. Things just started dropping off.
Really?
I've looked online to see if I can find what would be causing it. I thought, well, maybe it's just the 2G band, because it is a dual-band router. I thought maybe it's the 2G band, but everything else is connecting via the 5G that's also having issues. I am 100% stuck on this one.
Okay, well, let's start with this. When you say they drop off, do you still have a network address on the client side, and can you ping anything else on the network? Like, can you ping the gateway, for example?
No.
Okay.
Well, I can't even get to them. All the Pis are headless.
Oh, okay.
I can't even ping. Yeah, I can't even ping from the command line from there. And when the iPad drops off, and my iPad's done it too, it doesn't even show connected to the network, as well as like our laptops when it happens. They're not even showing connected.
Atypical in the chat room. You can join us at geeklab.ninja. It runs 24/7, 365. He says, this is a known problem with the Linksys AC line, and people have even tried with OpenWRT and aren't able to get this problem to go away. So I guess we'll start there. Steve, have you ever heard of such a thing?
My first thought was that we're having some sort of interference where I worked at a government building for a time, and they have decent Wi-Fi and stuff like that, but they stuck it too close to the microwave, and so every time at lunch when people started using the microwave frequently, the entire floor would lose connectivity. So my first thought is always, what's going on in the environment? Do I have something that's cross-talking? Do I have trouble that way? But if you're having problems with hardwired devices, how are they? Are they wired directly into the 2 or 3 Ethernet ports that are on the back of this thing? Or are they into a switch and then into the router itself?
A couple of them are wired directly in. A couple of them are in a switch.
Do you have all the devices drop at the same time, or is it random, like random devices will drop off?
They don't all drop off together. It's a onesie-twosie thing. So, for example, I have one Raspberry Pi Zero that I use as like a meeting status light. It will just drop off. And then it'll come back up, and then maybe an hour or so later, one of my Pi 3s will drop off. And then it'll come back up. And then an iPad will drop off, kind of a thing. But the iPads, I do know that the iPads and the laptops don't drop near as frequently as the Pis do. So that's why I thought it was maybe there.
That's why I was thinking it's a signal problem, like some sort of interference, because so laptops particularly will have a stronger connection because they often run the antenna around the outside of the monitor. So you've got a bigger base to act as an antenna compared to other smaller devices. Are you in an apartment building, or are you close to high density where there's a lot of other Wi-Fi going around?
Yeah, we live in an apartment-style condo.
Yeah, so there'd be a couple of things that I would look at. So inside of your, and it could be nothing, like atypical could be spot on. Like this could be a hardware problem, but this also, you could change the channel inside of the router itself. So most of the time the routers will pick channels, some channel right in the middle of the range, 6, 7, 8, something like that. And all of them will pick that, which means that they're all kind of broadcasting and stepping on each other. What happens with Wi-Fi, I know we've mentioned this in the past, is it doesn't matter if it's your Wi-Fi or somebody else's. When there's Wi-Fi signal being flying around, essentially what happens is the most chatty person will have the access in the airwave. So the thing that's pinging like crazy is going to be the thing that's going to keep the connection. Something that's intermittent will sit and wait. It'll try and broadcast, but it gets drowned out by the chattiest person in the room. Just like a big echo chamber with people, the person who's making the most noise is the one that's going to be heard the most often, and everybody else has to wait for that person to shut up. It's the same thing in Wi-Fi. So sometimes changing the channel will help you get away from some of that signal noise that you're seeing.
I thought that too, and I actually did try that. I also even tried changing modes, because I think this one does like A through N, and I even changed to like, even just taking it down like on the 2 gig band down to like B even. And that didn't seem to fix it. The router actually sits up on top of my desk, which is in our master bedroom, and then my Mac and even a couple of the wireless Raspberry Pis actually sit like right near there even. So I was also thinking interference too, but being that close, I would think that wouldn't be an issue.
No, proximity doesn't actually impact very much the ability for the Wi-Fi signals to be interfered with by things. I mean, it does, obviously, like compared to something that's 500 feet away. But at the same time, if you're getting heavy interference by something in the walls or something like that. So when I was in an apartment, we had our access point in the ceiling outside of our bedroom. And, you know, in an apartment, your bedroom isn't like, 10,000 square feet. We're talking about like it fit my bed and a couple of dressers, and that was the size of the room. And we still had problems with Wi-Fi because of all of the interference that was happening in the apartment complex. It was right there. I did all the tweaking that I could, and eventually I just said nuts to this, and I ran an Ethernet cable on the ceiling.
That's cheating, Steve.
It's cheating, but it worked. And I was never able to figure out what was causing the problem. It was very similar to what you're talking about. Like the stuff in the bedroom would drop or not connect, and it would be kind of random. So in my case, I know that the equipment was fine because when we moved, we're using it now. It's working just fine. But between the interference and the constraints inside of an apartment building, we were just euchred.
Doesn't really explain his wired connection problem, though, does it?
It doesn't. That one kind of surprises me. I was thinking that is more heat related, but hard to say.
So I guess I would try that. I would look. So did you say you have gone and looked up a channel guide for 5 gigahertz or 2.4 and got all the channel things dialed in as best you could?
Yes, I did actually. Yeah, that was one of the first things I looked at too, thinking, oh well, there's probably interference because I know I've got a couple of neighbors that run 5G as well. Well, pretty much everybody in here that has Spectrum runs 5G. So I thought, well, maybe that was it. And I started looking to see, okay, what channels are they running on? Where can I avoid, clash and things like that. What really stumped me overall on this thing was we used to have an ASUS router. Unfortunately, it wasn't fast enough to handle the bandwidth coming from the Spectrum modem. So that's why we upgraded to this Linksys, because I've always had great luck with Linksys products in the past. And I just, that's why I went, what?
That is a super strange problem. I think here would be my next troubleshooting steps. I think the first thing I would do is I might look at getting a more powerful access point, and I might see if I can position it more either centrally in the apartment if you can. If you can't, just getting it, just getting a dedicated access point might give you a little bit more oomph and a little bit more reach. Past that,
Do these things have a power rating in them? Like some, like the Unify have like a power rating in them to boost the signal or like to kind of tweak it that way. I wonder whether that also might help kind of drown out the noise around them. You know what I'm talking about, Noah?
I honestly don't even know.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. So there's a transmitter. Essentially, there's a transceiver inside of the access point, right? And so you can choose how high you want to turn the power up. Now, in the Unify thing that Steve was talking about, typically what you want to do is you want to keep it as low as possible, and then you slowly move it up, and that allows the zero handoff from the client device to jump from one to the other when the RSSI, there becomes a big enough difference there. I suspect, so this goes back to, so I strongly suspect that, anytime you combine a router, a switch, an access point all into one device, it's kind of like the spork syndrome, right? Is it a really good fork? Not really. Is it a good spoon? Not really. But it's a fork and a spoon all in one. Same thing, right? Does Linksys make a really good router? It's okay. Do they make a really good access point? It's all right. When you combine the access point, the switch, and the router, and then you have a demanding environment, that may be like the straw that broke the camel's back. So you can start to separate those things out. The thing that gives me pause and to say, hey, just go spend $100 and some on a UAP AC Pro, plug it in, is if you told me it was only happening with Wi-Fi, I would land there pretty quick. We start getting into wired problems. It makes me think there's something else going on, although I don't know what that would be. I've seen weird stuff where you have, a huge network with a ton of chatty devices and DHCP times out. That can't really be your issue because you live in an apartment. You don't have that many devices. I've seen issues where DHCP fails to work, but everything still talks on the network. Sounds like that's not your issue. I've never had it to where I just suddenly can't communicate with the network. And if I have, I've not seen that in both a wired and wireless connection. It's usually that's a layer 1 problem. Typically, there's something you can address in the connection medium. That doesn't seem to fit you. You seem to have broken the mold.
There's one case where I have experience where I'm not saying this is the case, but I was at a client's place, and what was happening was when their internet dropped, they could no longer ping things across. Well, in their case, across the VLAN. For people that are less network savvy, that shouldn't happen. Like your access to the internet should not matter where on your network your stuff was. We never really tracked down where the problem was. We had to hand that off to somebody else. But the fact that somehow it was trying to make a connection out to something trying to connect to the internet, whether it's DHCP or something, as soon as it lost that WAN connection, it was just like, nah, I'm not forwarding those packets. And that affected both the wireless and the wired clients. So obviously not your case, but there are weird corner cases that exist out there.
Absolutely. Atypical in the chat room suggests that a cheap SDR would help you figure out the wireless side of it anyway. You could at least see how much wireless traffic. Actually, you don't even have to buy an SDR now that I think about it. There's an app called Wi-Fi Analyzer if you've got an Android phone. And you can download this thing, and it will. What it does is it will let you open up, and I can see a list of all of the access points that are in my area, as well as it will show me the signal separation. So I can see, you want 20 dB of signal separation to get a solid connection. And so if you start to see your neighbor's access point or other Wi-Fi networks that aren't yours, and they have that higher than 20 dB of separation from your device, that's when you know you're going to start to have issues.
Okay. Well, I do have a couple of RTL SDR dongles here. I'm a ham radio operator as well, and I've been playing with those. So that I could actually probably use one of those to look at it too then.
Okay, sounds good. Well, do me a favor. If you could do that and give us a call back, I'd love to know what you wind up on, okay?
I appreciate it. I will do that.
All right, thanks for the call. 855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Joining us in our interactive Mumble room, you can too. You can go to mumble.mindrapone.com. Sleuth, welcome in, sir.
Hey, Noah. I have a question today. I've been looking at getting a used ThinkPad, and I was curious what all I should be looking at, because I'm not really a ThinkPad guy, but I know that you and Steve both tend to use those machines and that you use a lot of them at Altispeed. So I was curious, what kind of machines should I look at or avoid, and how will they run on Linux?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with Steve. Do you have any thoughts on buying used computers? Do you have any general advice that you hand out?
I would make sure that you ask the relevant questions like, is there anything wrong with the screen? Those are the types of things that I'd be interested in. You also might, with the ThinkPads, generally it's not true, but more and more there are some that don't have user replaceable parts, like the stuff is soldered in. And so, like the X1, for example, you can find them that are not soldered in, but the vast majority you'll find will have soldered down parts. And so you want to make sure that you're okay with whatever it is. Like, there's nothing wrong with the soldered parts if it has exactly what you want.
Yeah. But then you're on the hook if it ever goes bad too, right?
Yep, absolutely. And that does happen.
So let me start here, Sleuth. I would suggest that you start with looking at something like a T-Pad T480, the ThinkPad T480. Now, here's how I arrived there. First thing I'm looking for in a used laptop is a popular model that's been used by a lot of companies. Reason that I look for that is a couple-fold. One is I know that has a track history of being treated fairly, not so much the track history of being treated fairly well, but a track history of being used in a production environment without a whole lot of problems. The second thing is they're generally cheaper because there's a lot of them on the market. The third thing is I start to drill into the technical specifications of the computer, because really, when you say like what ones to avoid, I would say avoid the cheap ThinkPads, the E-series, not because they won't run with Linux, but because they're inexpensive, cheap junk. The T-series, a very, very well-built series, was $1,000 plus laptop when it was new, but you can go find the T480. I'm looking at one on eBay right now for $279. Okay, doesn't come with an AC adapter, and so I'd recommend you pick up like an Anker Type C 65 watt adapter. They call it the IQ. It's an extra $29. But what you get with the T480, Thunderbolt, so you can do Thunderbolt docking. 8000 series Core i5, or you can get a Core i7. It comes with 16 gigabytes RAM. To Steve's point, that is not soldered, and you can just pop it open and put up to 32 gigs of RAM inside of the device. It has two storage slots. One is you can store a traditional 2.5-inch drive. The second is a M.2 NVMe. It's just the half stick size. And so this is why we've kind of standardized on the T480 at Altispeed, is because A, they're very inexpensive, and we can get them off of eBay fairly inexpensively. A lot of them are made with 1080p screens because they were used by Google and Amazon and all the places. And you can get them with up to 32 gigs of RAM. So if you need to emulate a bunch of VMs and stuff, doesn't preclude doing that.
So I also like to make sure that they have the dock on the bottom. So I know that Noah likes the Thunderbolt dock. I actually like the docks where you can just drop them in. So both of the ThinkPads I have, I just drop them on the dock, and it's got the nice little button to eject them. I like that better. It's lazy. I don't want to think about cables. I just hit that button and pull the thing out.
100%. And I've used both. I used to have the Dell E-Series dock where you set it in. I agree with you 100%. It feels like you're just setting your laptop down and somehow it magically transforms into a desktop. The pushback I would give you on that is you're locked into a very specific model. The nice thing about my Thunderbolt dock is I've gone through 3 laptops, I haven't changed the dock. I put it in one time, and now I buy a new laptop, and the same cable plugs in and just takes over all the stuff.
So have you guys gotten the fingerprint reader to work in Linux?
No. To be fair, we've not really tried. Yeah, I think we did once on a Dell XPS, but yeah, in general, have not had great luck with the fingerprint reader on Linux. Although I do think I saw something. The latest version of Ubuntu has it built in, I think, natively to the user manager, so it might be easier now. And it's been a few years since I've tried.
I mean,
and then I was looking at the docking connector on the side. Is that a Type-C port?
It is.
Like the little piece of it?
Yep. So
I can just plug a USB-C into it?
You can. The reason that it's a special thing is twofold. So to appease the people like Steve, you can set the laptop into a little holder thing, and then when you push the quote-unquote lock button, it slides a little connector into the side and connects to that Type-C port. Second thing it does, and this is specific to ThinkPads, it will pass the MAC address inside of the computer out through the dock. So if you're in a corporate environment, your MAC address follows you around no matter where you're docking. You don't get a separate NIC.
That's really cool.
Yep.
I had started to shop around a little bit, and I was seeing T495s
Even better.
And T14s.
Yep. Yeah. The T495 is going to be the AMD one, I think, right?
Yeah, this one is an AMD Ryzen.
It's going to be a little more expensive, but that's an even better laptop than the T480.
Yeah, have you used the difference, the AMD Ryzen ones versus the Intel ones?
No, but I can tell you almost definitively you're going to have a better experience on the AMD ones.
Okay, so those don't have Thunderbolt, of course, is the trade-off.
But they do have USB 4, right? Because I don't think you would give up. I don't know is the answer. I don't know.
Okay.
I'd have to look at it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for the call. Again, 855-450-NOAH, or really the great way to do it is through Mumble, because it gives you the opportunity to participate in the discussion, ask the questions, and you sound a little bit better. Hey, Steve, you ready to dig into a couple of feedback?
Absolutely.
All right, our first email comes in this evening from Brian and Jeremy. Brian writes in and says, "Hi, guys. I had a similar problem accessing my bank in the UK. I use a mobile SIM in a modem router combo. I spoke to a tech person at the bank, and he told me the reason I had login problems is because my IP kept changing during the login process. I solved the problem by using a VPN, and so I'm confident that Steve's suggestion of using a VPN will prove to be a good one. I enjoy listening to the problem solving on your program. Thanks a lot, Brian." Jeremy writes in, again, this is all in response to the gentleman who was having trouble with his church logging into his bank after they changed ISPs over to a fiber connection. Jeremy writes in and he says, "I don't think his issue is due to the change in ISP, but rather a change in the IP cookie pair they use to perform fraud detection. It may be that they have an algorithm that is ban happy. Take, for example, if you go to any other major bank and try to log in with your account from another town, it oftentimes will reauthor using two-factor in order to generate another cookie to ensure a secure access to your account. It sounds like their website is too aggressive and not sophisticated enough to do the aforementioned cookie refresh. If you don't want to change banks after spending some time with them on the phone, you could just install a dial home application like Log Me In on that PC and work with bill pay." Best, Jeremy. So the nice thing I'm happy about this, Steve, is like our suggestions will get him to the right solution, right?
Yep. I think it's nice to see that a couple other people were sniffing down the same path.
Yeah. Our second email comes in from Travis. Travis writes in and says, "Hey, Noah and Steve, I'll start by apologizing for a bit of a long-winded email. I thought since I'd never written, I'd start by giving you thanks for the great content. I'm a former IT manager, now disabled due to back injuries. I worked for a locally owned corporation managing IT infrastructure. The company I worked for, several hundred employees, and I managed all of these users and assets by myself with only 2 other subordinate employees. I stumbled on a company called Global Cache, and they provide a small ad hoc products that they use all the way up to large rack mount control units. Their tech will work with IR serial, etc. At the time, we were looking at mid to high-end AV devices, either that had an RS-232 port or serial controller would accept serial commands from some variation from a network connection. This seems to require some research on the tech documentation referencing in my situation, but proved to be worth it. While I haven't done anything with these devices in a long time, I'm all but certain they can be implemented with Home Assistant, Homebridge, and many other control options. This is a type of solution that's definitely a deep rabbit hole, and I'm sure that Global Cache isn't the only company with this sort of product line. They are just the company, as I discovered, in the state offer high-quality products. Here's a link to their site. At any rate, I know this was a long one. If you read through it all, thanks. In closing, thanks for all the contributions to the community. Much appreciated, Travis. So, really appreciate this, Travis. I do absolutely think that between things like BitFocus Companion and Home Assistant, we're eventually going to get more into controlling projectors and AV stuff. I think you're going to see more of that hitting the market. With that, we'll head to the Linux Newswire with JT standing by with the latest.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
At long last, Linux 6.0 has arrived. And looking forward to the future, the Rust infrastructure pull request has been submitted for Linux 6.1. Ahead of the merge window, longtime kernel developer Keys Cook, working with Rust for Linux lead developer Miguel Ojeda, has submitted the much-anticipated Rust introduction pull request intended for Linux 6.1. In security news, the recently discovered Linux-based ransomware stream known as CheerScript has been attributed to a Chinese cyber espionage group known for short-lived ransomware schemes. Also, researchers have revealed a never-before-seen piece of cross-platform malware that has infected a wide range of Linux and Windows devices, including small office routers, FreeBSD boxes, and large enterprise servers. Black Lotus Labs, the research arm of the security firm Lumen, is calling the malware chaos, a word that repeatedly appears in function names, certificates, and the file names that it uses. Black Lotus has observed interactions with these staging servers from both embedded Linux devices as well as enterprise servers, including one in Europe that was hosting an instance of GitLab. There are more than 100 unique samples in the wild. The notorious North Korean-associated hacking group Lazarus has been identified in a new campaign weaponizing legitimate open-source software. The software is being leveraged by the group to target employees and organizations across multiple industries and countries. PuTTY, Kitty, TightVNC, Sumatra PDF Reader, and Mu PDF subliminal recording have all been targeted. However, in more positive security news, Parrot Security has released Parrot 5.1 as the latest stable release of their Debian-based ethical hacking and penetration testing distribution, bringing updated tools and new features. Parrot 5.1 also ships with the in-house built AnonSurf 4 anonymity tool that provides users with a solution to automatically route all system traffic through the anonymous Tor network. In other release news, Carbon OS has released version 2022.2. And Tuxedo OS, a German-based Linux distribution, has released version 1.0. Qt 6.4 has been released, as well as Bash 5.2. And Sear, a GUI front-end to GDB for Linux, has released version 1.11. In hardware news, Star Labs has just unveiled the company's upcoming Starfighter Linux laptop, which will come with a generous set of hardware choices, the highlight being able to choose between AMD and Intel processors. And System 76 Onyx Pro laptop was just updated with the 12th gen Intel Core Alder Lake CPU, an NVIDIA GeForce 3070 Ti or 3080 Ti, as well as a 4K OLED display.
A while back, we introduced you to RISC-V and started talking about the advantages of this open ecosystem. Well, a few weeks ago, we covered the news that NASA has chosen RISC-V as their go-to standard for sending stuff up into space. So we invited Jack Kang, who joins us this hour. He's the Senior Vice President of Business Development, Customer Experience, and Corporate Marketing. Sir, welcome into the program. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us tonight. I want to get right into it. I want to start by getting a little bit of a lay of the land. Talk to me a little bit about what SiFive is and its relationship to RISC International.
Yeah, so SiFive, we're the founder and leader of RISC-V, and the reason for that is the company was founded by the inventors of RISC-V. So RISC-V was invented in 2010 at UC Berkeley. So Professor Krista Asanovich and two of his grad students, Yunsub Lee and Andrew Waterman, they were the ones who invented RISC-V. And as they approached graduation in 2015, they did two things. One was they set up RISC-V International, which is the standards body that now manages the RISC-V ISA spec. And then they started SiFive, a company here to commercialize RISC-V because they realized that there was some significant commercial opportunities and this demand for RISC-V based products. So now SiFive, we've been working on that since 2015. And what we really have is we have the largest portfolio of RISC-V products. We have the most number of customers, the most number of design wins, 300 plus design wins, 100 plus different customers, 8 of the top 10 semiconductor companies are our customers. And, because of that, we are able to invest the most money in continuing to develop RISC-V. So really, we view our role as to, continue to develop better and better RISC-V products, work with our customers and help them, adopt this new architecture.
Can you talk a little bit about what the ecosystem of RISC-V looks like? Who owns the IP, or how is that structured?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. When we say IP of RISC-V, it really depends on what you mean, and I think there are some misconceptions here. So RISC-V properly is just the ISA. So the ISA is a specification of the instruction set. It's a very important specification. It's the only, it's the one that defines how hardware talks with software. But that specification is managed by RISC-V International, which is a nonprofit made up of the member companies. So people contribute to that. That standard gets published. It's open. Anybody can use it. And then there's a lot of rules in terms of how people contribute those things so that the patent rights and other stuff to any contributions of the specification are laid out properly, and that's managed by RVI. Now, because the ISA itself is then open, you can have many different implementations of that. And of that, that's where a company like SiFive comes in, where we have commercial implementations of RISC-V. So our portfolio of products has different implementations covering microcontrollers to real-time cores to application cores, so high performance, going towards data center type computing type cores. Now, those implementations is SiFive IP, and our business model is to license that. But the IP relative to what the RISC-V ISA is and that standard, that comes from RISC-V International, and that's the open standard that creates all the new business opportunities for RISC-V.
Jack, SiFive is a leading U.S.-based semiconductor company. Can you talk a little bit about what SiFive does specifically with RISC-V? You write IP, is that right?
Yeah, so we write IP and we license it. So we license Verilog at the end of the day to our customers, who tend to be SoC makers, who then implement that into their design, right? So one of the things now that kind of sets this question is, for us, we are a U.S.-based IP company, so our designs are U.S. and with recent kind of a lot of onshoring type activities, we provide the opportunity for 100% onshore chain where you're using U.S. IP, U.S. chip companies, they can use manufacturing in the U.S. and you can have kind of a 100% onshore type solution. But that said, we have plenty of customers who use foundries all around the world. We have chip companies who use our products all around the world. But our products are not the chips themselves, but rather the IP that we license to our customers so that they can put in their design.
What is the advantage of RISC-V as opposed to x86 or ARM that a lot of people are going to be familiar with? They have it in their smartphone or their computer.
Yeah, so there's fundamentally one really important distinction that gives it a very long-term advantage, and then the other one is the technical side. So on the first one is RISC-V is a open standard that anybody can access. That means you're going to have choice in the market because there's different implementers. You can choose to implement it yourself. There's different ways to deploy it. So you have choice in the market. If you contrast that to x86, really there's only two companies that produce x86 stuff, Intel and AMD. And if you want x86, your only choice is you can buy a chip from Intel or you can buy a chip from AMD. So you really don't have much choice at all. ARM is another one where it looks like there's a lot of choice because there's a lot of different SoC vendors all building ARM-based solutions. But ultimately, it all goes back to a single company. Any changes, any new things at ISA, any new features, it all has to go back to a single entity called ARM. And they're a great company. They're very successful. But everything has to go back to that single company. If you compare that to RISC-V, RISC-V is open. So you can choose to do what you want with it. So that choice basically also creates not just competition in the market, but a diversity of solutions. So you're going to have a much larger ecosystem because you have many more solutions. It's what the whole world can produce. It's not just what one company can produce, right? So I think that is the biggest difference between RISC-V and the other, x86 and ARM. And then the other portion I mentioned earlier on the technical side is obviously it was a modern, clean slate design. Whenever you design something new, you get to look at the what's happened in the past and take the best and avoid other mistakes. So there's just less baggage. It's a much more modern design. So it actually lends itself to more efficient, more power efficient, more performant type of designs. But that's very important. But to me, that's second order from the big point, which is that choice and that freedom because it's open.
I love that. Can you talk a little bit about what your ideal use case is? Who are the kind of customers that look and say, you know what, this is the kind of product or situation where we have to go with RISC-V or where that's really going to be advantageous for us?
Yeah, so I really do believe, the future of RISC-V is inevitable. Everything will just be RISC-V. A future of compute, all things will eventually go to RISC-V. And the reason for that is because you have that diversity of solutions, because people can implement different things, and it's designed from day one to support very small microcontrollers to real-time cores to application cores to HPC type systems, because the diversity of implementations allows you to be in all these different markets. As you get in more markets, you get more software, you get a bigger software ecosystem, you get a bigger engineering ecosystem, and it's very virtuous from one market to the other. So over time, and the time is quite rapid, it will be in everything. But I think more to maybe your question is like, what do you think is going to happen first? How is it going to evolve? And I think that's where, the ability to kind of have domain specific, the ability to customize, the ability to really target things really plays a big role. So a lot of these new fields or these new applications that are up and coming where it's not solved by general purpose computing, where they need to spend the time to do actual development to target very specific solutions. Any market that has first-party software or new software being developed, when they get to choose at that point, then they choose RISC-V, and that's how the market has evolved.
You've mentioned the open design of RISC-V numerous times, and indeed having an open marketplace where products and services can compete creates for a better overall product. I want to dig into the NASA deal. What value did NASA place in the open architecture of RISC-V?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and that's a really important, I think, design win for, not just validating RISC-V, but kind of making it clear where it's going. So one of the things you have to know about, what NASA is building is they're building really a platform. You look at the past spaceflight computers; these things need to last a very long time, decades. And it's going to be used in many different applications. And so what they're looking at, one of the key parts is, what does the ecosystem look like? What ecosystem am I going to be able to have programmers, developers for that I know is going to be working on this, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And when you look at that, RISC-V actually has the best and most stable ecosystem because it's growing, because what's happening, because it's open, it can never be taken away. RISC-V can't be bought by any one random company that does something weird with it. It exists. It will always exist. So in that sense, the ecosystem is not just stable, but it's expanding and growing and kind of success guaranteed because of that. So when they look at that from an ecosystem perspective, it becomes a huge positive, which gets back to, I think, the next stage of the evolution that we are in with RISC-V, where, hey, it's not just cool because it's open. It's not just cool that it has choice. It actually ends up, it's just better. The products are going to be better. The ecosystem is better, right? So that's key point number one. Key point number two, obviously, the product had to perform, right? And I think this is one of the other things where you look like a NASA project, they're not trying to save a few dollars here and there, right? This is not a price-based decision. This is what's the best product with the best ecosystem.
The X280 is a multi-core capable RISC-V processor. Jack, can you go into a little bit about why this processor specifically was chosen by NASA? What were they looking for in a processor, and how did this particular product from SiFive deliver on that?
Yeah, so I need to be just a little bit cautious here because I think in terms of some of the technical details going into this has not been opened up yet from NASA and a few other folks. So I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I can talk a little bit about X280 and what that processor brings. So X280 is one of our first vector-enabled processors. So one of the really important extensions for RISC-V is the vector extension. So the vector extension basically allows for very efficient, data computation, like moving lots of data and data type applications. Sorry. So scientific applications, it's very good for image processing, image pre-processing, post-processing, AI inference, those type of applications that drive a lot of data. And the thing with vectors is it presents a very nice compute interface. So we actually see a lot of the architectures these days have moved away from SIMD and into vectors, right? ARM has vector extensions, Intel x86 has vector extensions. So this is RISC-V's vector extensions, and it's designed from day one that vector extensions will be a big part of RISC-V. So the X280 combines basically our scalar processing, which lets you run all your standard software like Linux and standard tools and everything that goes along with it. And it's built in with RISC-V vectors, which lets you do a lot of the data processing and data computation very efficiently. And you can do it all with one single programming stream. So one RISC-V programming stream with one set of tools, as opposed to a CPU plus an accelerator or something more complex like that. And then because it's standard software, standard RISC-V vector software will run on X280. So if you think about this is a great point. When we go back to RISC-V, what does community like? They like to contribute. So you can contribute RISC-V vector code for various scientific workloads and other things that you can imagine might be useful. And that software code might very well run on the X280, which might very well be used by, who knows what kind of applications.
It gets my interest and attention when I see what NASA is doing, and it kind of made me dig into a little bit about what you guys are doing over at SiFive. But does any of this apply to the hobbyist? Can the hobbyist get into RISC-V? Undoubtedly, there's somebody listening there and going, that's really cool that Jack is saying that the future is going to be RISC-V. I would like to participate in that. Where could I get my hands on a RISC-V chip, and how do I go about investigating that architecture and that ecosystem? What advice could you give to somebody who wanted to start playing in that field?
Yeah, I think the really cool thing about RISC-V is it invites that, and it allows for many different ways for folks to help. So I think the first thing I would say is, are they interested in the hardware side or the software side? Because there's different ways to contribute to both. So on the hardware side, you can work with RISC-V International, you can propose standards, you can create new extensions, things like that will eventually make its way into all hardware, right? But that's for like CPU architects, and people are really in on that. If you're into hardware design, there are open source implementations of RISC-V that you can play with and you can tinker with and you can really learn a lot and contribute to. So things like the Rocket Core, things like Pulpino, like things like Swerve, these are open source RISC-V cores that are broadly used for research and other things. You can participate there. The X280, for example, that is a SiFive core. We build that. So the way to contribute to working with that would be on the software side. So on the software side, there's all these open source projects. We need open source tools. We need a lot more software. I mentioned RISC-V vectors earlier. This is really exciting. This is a completely new area. So we can talk about, can we port more, inferencing engines? Can we port more scientific libraries? Things like Open Blast, math functions, FFT transforms. There's all these algorithms that can be ported and written and optimized for RISC-V vectors. So if you're on the software side, there's plenty of projects and opportunities to contribute, in open source code bases, repository that will run on both these open cores and these commercial cores. So that would be a great way to contribute. And the nice thing about RISC-V is it takes advantage of all of this. So at the end of the day, when your product is deployed, people take what's the best software available, right? So if you have the best, Open Blast library, people will probably use yours. So it's really kind of opens the door for many different ways to contribute.
Jack, when might we start seeing RISC-V come out in things like laptops and desktops?
Great question. So I think this is inevitable. I think, certainly within the next decade, hopefully sooner. I think, we've already seen some, significant traction in embedded. Plenty of embedded products are there. We look at the automotive sector. They're, starting to move to RISC-V already. I think I've been quoted on some places predicting, that automotive is going to happen within 5 years. So I think, laptops and mobile is just a few years after that.
Will SiFive be working with any chip manufacturers that are creating maybe single board computers that might compete with something like the Raspberry Pi?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do at SiFive, especially in the early days when we're trying to tell the world what is RISC-V and getting people comfortable with the idea, was we put out our own development boards, right? So the Hi5 Rev 1, the Hi5 Unmatched, the Hi5 Unleashed. These are software development boards, so people can see that it both exists in silicon and they can write software. So our focus for that has been kind of make the software development as easy as possible. So there's a lot of peripherals and other things connected to these boards. So they tended to be, openly accessible, but they were more like $500 or $600 type boards for big serious software development, right? So I know some of the hobbyists, that's not exactly the price point that they want. But I do think as RISC-V continues to grow, and we have lots of customers who are taking our cores and building various microcontrollers and Wi-Fi type chips and other stuff, I think the ecosystem will naturally create, kind of hobbyist level, lower cost dev boards that are available. I think there's a couple even this year that have been announced, like in $100 range from others that utilize the SiFive cores, but it's not a SiFive product, but they use the SiFive cores, and those are great. Like, all this helps the ecosystem. But what we do, the development boards that we do, tends to be the bigger ones, because we want to, we need to enable kind of large software deployment. People want to take it and, rack it and make build farms and other things. So, it's all, the nice part of RISC-V is we don't have to do everything, and we can't do everything, and we don't want to do everything, but the community as a whole makes everybody better. That's why, again, we'll see this grow faster and faster.
What are some of the biggest hurdles and or roadblocks for companies or people that are considering implementing or rolling something out on RISC-V?
Yeah, I think it's really just change. It's a new thing, and when people do something new, there's always a slight hesitance in the beginning, and they take a little bit, baby steps, but then they start seeing other people doing it, and then they get more brave, they get more courageous, and they want to start doing it. So as it turns from, do I really want to go, to I'm really afraid of missing out, that's the stage that we're in. People are starting to be afraid that they're missing out. So I think the initial reluctance, where we're at that tipping point where everybody's going to come on board, and and the hardware and the other product capabilities also caught up. So I think you're going to see in the next 12 months a dramatic change. If you think things are happening fast now, like, check back in a year.
Can you tell me a little bit about what SiFive might be doing in the upcoming automotive space?
Yeah, so we actually just launched a whole new family of products called SiFive Automotive, which is targeted for the automotive market. So the automotive market is a bit unique and different in that they require what's called functional safety, so fault tolerance, and basically to make sure that things don't crash, right, and cars don't crash, things like that. So there's a much higher safety bar that's required. So there's certain things that you have to do in your IP and in your chips to kind of ensure that. So now we have a dedicated family of processors for that space. And one of the reasons why is RISC-V, I think I mentioned earlier that RISC-V can really go everywhere, and we expect it to go everywhere. So the question, listeners might be asking, why automotive? Why the focus there? Well, automotive is going through a transformation, right? Obviously, autonomous driving, and that kind of gets the headline. But the fundamental architecture of how compute is done in the car is changing. So instead of lots of those small microcontrollers doing various things, we're getting into much more kind of central compute or zone type designs, where they need much more computational capability in the car to do autonomous driving and driver assist and all these other things. So they need more compute. They're changing the architecture of the compute. And when that happens, they also have their own software. So when you have your own software, first-party software, you become a candidate to change to RISC-V sooner. I think everyone changes to RISC-V, but the folks who have their own software will change sooner, because they go, okay, I had to build a new architecture. I need higher performance. I need all this stuff. I'm going to invest all this new software. What ecosystem do I want to be on? So then you have to ask yourself, do I want to be on the open ecosystem with lots of choice of vendors and I can do it myself and everything else? Or do I want to be in the proprietary ecosystem where I have one vendor to choose from, and if they don't want to do something that helps me, I'm really stuck? So of course you choose the open one. So that combined with all the changes is why RISC-V is seeing a lot of success in that market. So in a lot of ways, we're just listening to our customers who've been asking us for this. So yeah, we just introduced a complete family of products for that, and you'll see more products to come in that family.
Does RISC-V support real-time operating systems? And if so, is this maybe an application for something like that?
Yes and yes. So RISC-V does, and there's some specific, well, I shouldn't say. So when I say RISC-V does, that's actually incorrect. SiFive does. RISC-V as an ISA, it doesn't preclude it. It doesn't support it. You can do that. That becomes a implementation of how you implement your core. So I should say that the SiFive, we have RISC-V cores that support real-time features, deterministic type computing, and some, actually some new features that aren't in the market today in our cores. It's very well suited for automotive applications. It's very well suited for like some aerospace applications. So yeah, the short answer is yes, but the key caveat there is like it's not RISC-V that supports it. It's the SiFive implementations that support it. Other implementations may or may not.
Jack Kang, he is the Senior Vice President of Business Development, Customer Experience, and Corporate Marketing, and part of the founding team at SiFive, and guest this hour on the Ask Noah Show. Jack, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, sir. We'll get you back on the program real soon.
Thank you for having me.
Joining us in the Mumble Room is Naylor. Sir, you are on the air.
Hey, guys. How we doing?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good. First of all, I want to thank you genuinely and sarcastically for all the talk about Home Assistant, because I am so far in that rabbit hole, it is not even funny.
All right. Well, we got a minute. What can we answer for you?
I want to know about home events. Steve actually pointed me in a direction earlier today, and I've got it sending me Telegram messages. But, like, let's say I want to know if it's supposed to be opened. What is the best way to get that event to me? Is it through the Home Assistant app itself? Is there something else you know about, or am I just stuck with Telegram? Because let's face it, that is it's just a whole bunch of messages coming all the time, and I mute half the things.
Steve, we got about 50 seconds. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So real quick, if you expose your Home Assistant outside of your network, either through Nabocasa or whatever, I also use the Home Assistant app for push notifications. So if you don't like Telegram, you can absolutely use the Home Assistant app to get push notifications, with the caveat you're only going to get those when your device is on the local LAN, unless you are connected through Nabocasa or pushing it out into the internet.
You could potentially have like a VPN too, couldn't you?
You could, but then you'd have to have the phone on your VPN all the time so that you'd get those notifications.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that done with WireGuard now, where it'll just transparently connect in the background. And then you can kind of keep that persistent connection going from your mobile device out back to Home Assistant. But anyway, you might give that a shot. Let us know. Get back to us if it doesn't work. We'd love to know. Hey, music in our ears means we're out of time. A huge thank you for joining us. If you joined us live, it happens every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central at AskNoahShow.com. You can catch up with us and follow the latest on Twitter. He's at Linux Ovens. I'm at Colonel Linux. The show at Ask Noah Show. We're back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. We'll answer your questions live. In the meantime, we invite you to send emails to live@asknoahshow.com. We'll take your feedback throughout the week. We'll see you here next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central, AskNoahShow.com. Have a great week.